Most people think danger comes from strangers, but sometimes it lives one wall away, one driveway over, one thin door between you and someone you don't really know. These stories were shared online and rewritten for narration. If you live alone, lock your doors. And if you think you know your neighbors, you probably don't. The extra key that wasn't mine. I moved into a quiet apartment complex because it felt safe. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, well-lit, and mostly older tenants. The kind of place where people nodded at you in the hallway and kept to themselves. My unit sat at the end of the second-floor corridor, and the only neighbor on my side was an older guy named Gary. Gary was friendly in that dry, harmless way. He'd hold the door, make small talk, complain about the weather. I never got a bad feeling from him. If anything, he seemed lonely. The first strange thing happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. I came home from work and found my doormat slightly crooked, like someone had stepped on it and tried to straighten it again. I figured it was the maintenance guy. The building had occasional repairs. Then I noticed my deadbolt wasn't fully turned. It wasn't unlocked, but it wasn't locked the way I always locked it. I remembered turning it. I'm obsessive about it. I stood there for a second with my key in my hand, staring at the door like it might explain itself. I walked inside slowly. Everything looked normal. No missing items, no drawers open, no footprints, nothing. Still, I felt uneasy. So I bought a cheap door sensor and a little camera for the entryway. Nothing fancy, just something to tell me if the door opened. A few nights later, I got a notification while I was at work. Door opened. I clicked the live feed immediately. The camera showed my hallway. The lighting was the same. The timestamp was real. My stomach tightened because I knew I wasn't home. Then I saw a hand holding a key. The door opened just an inch, like the person didn't want the camera to catch much. The hand stopped, hovered, and then the door closed again, slowly, carefully. No one entered. It was like someone was testing it. I showed the footage to the building manager the next morning. He looked annoyed, like I was making his day harder. He said it was probably maintenance. I asked if maintenance would open someone's door without knocking, then close it again and walk away. He shrugged. So I changed my locks. 2 days later, I bumped into Gary outside near the mailboxes. He smiled and said, "You got your lock replaced?" I froze. I hadn't told anyone, and he wasn't the type to notice details. Not like that. I asked him how he knew. He chuckled like it was a joke. "Oh, you can hear everything in these walls. When they drilled, it shook my picture frames." That made sense. Until he added, "You should have told me. I still have the spare." My brain didn't process it at first. I just stared at him. "The spare?" I said. He nodded casually. "The spare key. For emergencies. The old tenant gave it to me." The building manager later confirmed something that made my skin go cold. Gary had volunteered for years to help neighbors and hold spares because, in his words, people lock themselves out all the time. No one had ever formally approved it. They just let him. I filed a report. The manager asked Gary to return any keys he had. Gary denied he had anything, said I misunderstood. But that night, my door sensor went off again. Door opened. This time the camera clearly caught him. Gary, standing in the hallway, inches from my door. He didn't try to open it. He didn't knock. He just stood there, head tilted slightly like he was listening for movement inside. Then he walked away. I moved out 2 weeks later, and I still don't let anyone hold a spare for me. Not ever again. Story 2. the neighbor who knew when my lights were off. I bought a small house in a normal neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just a place where I could finally breathe without hearing other people through walls. My next-door neighbor was a guy named Trevor, mid-30s, always outside working on something, always waving, always overly friendly. He'd offer to help with trash cans, ask about my schedule, tell me about the problem people on the street, like he was the unofficial neighborhood watch. At first, it felt comforting. Then it became specific. The first time I noticed it was when I came home late from work. My porch light was off. I'd forgotten to turn it on before I left. As I stepped onto my driveway, Trevor's front door opened, and he came out like he'd been waiting. "Everything okay?" he asked. I said, "Yeah, just got home late." He nodded and said, "I noticed your lights were off early tonight. Thought something might be wrong." That sounded normal, until I realized he couldn't have seen my lights from his house unless he was watching at a particular angle, past a row of bushes. A few days later, I tested something. Before I left for work, I turned on every light in the house and left one room dark. My bedroom. The next day, Trevor waved me down while I was checking the mail. "Your bedroom light's been out," he said, smiling. "You should replace that bulb. Makes it look like nobody's home." I felt my stomach drop. He wasn't joking. He said it like a suggestion. I asked him why he was paying attention to my bedroom. He laughed like I was being dramatic. Just being helpful. That night, I checked my router settings and my smart devices. I noticed an unfamiliar device connected briefly around 2 a.m., then gone. The name was something generic like Android_4821. I changed the Wi-Fi password, turned off remote access, set up a camera facing my living room window. The next morning, I found something in my yard, a tiny black plastic cap, like the kind that covers a pinhole lens. I didn't know what it was until I zoomed in on my camera footage. At 1:47 a.m., someone walked across my lawn with a flashlight covered by their hand. The person crouched near my window, right where the bushes made a blind spot. When the flashlight shifted slightly, it lit their face. Trevor. He wasn't breaking in. He wasn't stealing. He was adjusting something near my window. Then he stood, looked directly toward my house, and stayed still for a few seconds, like he was checking if I'd noticed. I called the police. They arrived, walked the property, and asked if I had proof. I showed them the clip. Trevor claimed he saw a raccoon and came to protect my home. The officer looked unconvinced, but they couldn't arrest him for standing in a yard if he claimed it was a concerned neighbor. 2 days later, I found the actual device. A small battery-powered camera wedged into the hedge, pointed at my window, angled perfectly to see into my living room when the curtains were open. The scariest part wasn't that it existed. It was how confident he was that I'd never find it. I moved my desk away from the window, kept the curtains closed, and sold the house the following month. Even now, whenever someone says, "I'm just being helpful," I don't hear kindness. I hear entitlement. Story 3. The shared wall. I lived in a townhouse with a shared wall on both sides. It was affordable, clean, and close to my job. I didn't love the idea of sharing walls, but I figured it was the normal trade-off for a good price. My neighbor on the left was quiet. Too quiet. I'd see her sometimes. An older woman, polite, a little distant. She'd nod, disappear inside, and I wouldn't hear anything from her for days. Then one night, I heard a sound behind my living room wall. Not pipes, not house settling. Scratching. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging their nails across wood. It stopped when I stood up. A minute later, it started again, a little higher, like it was moving upward. I told myself it was animals in the walls. Mice, squirrels, something. But then I noticed the pattern. It only happened when my TV was on low. Only when I was on the couch. Only when the lights in the living room were dim. I started keeping a notebook, writing down the time. It was almost always between 12:30 and 1:30 a.m. One night, I turned everything off and sat in silence. Nothing. Then I turned my TV on, muted, and sat down. Within 2 minutes, the scratching began again. It felt like someone was responding. I called my landlord. He sent pest control. They found nothing. No droppings, no nests, no entry holes. The scratching continued. So I did something that still makes me feel stupid, but I needed answers. I placed a small Bluetooth speaker against the shared wall and played white noise. The scratching stopped instantly, not gradually, not slowly, instantly. The next day, I got a knock on my door. It was my neighbor. She smiled in this strange, calm way and said, "Your little machine is loud." My throat tightened. "Sorry," I said. "I'll turn it down." She nodded and left. That night I heard a new sound. Not scratching. Tapping. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Like a code. I didn't respond. I didn't move. A few minutes later, the tapping moved. Down the wall. Toward the floor. Then I heard the softest sound under my baseboard. A whisper. I couldn't understand words. Just the shape of someone speaking quietly. I grabbed my phone and recorded audio. The next morning, when I played it back with headphones, I finally heard something clear. It was my name. Just my name. Over and over, in a low voice, like someone practicing how to say it. I moved out that weekend, and I never learned what she was doing on the other side of that wall. But I learned something else. Some people don't need to enter your home to invade it. They just need to be close enough. Story 4. The package that kept coming back. I lived in a building where packages were left in a small mailroom by the lobby. It wasn't secure, but it was normal. People came and went. Nothing ever happened. Until I started receiving packages I never ordered. The first one was a plain box with no branding. My name and address were printed neatly, like a normal delivery label. Inside was a cheap kitchen knife, still in plastic. Nothing else. I assumed it was a mistake. I reported it, threw it away, moved on. A week later, another box arrived. This time it was a small flashlight, heavy duty, the kind you could use as a weapon if you had to. Again, no note. I checked my bank accounts, no charges, no emails, no purchase history. Then I got a third package, a door chain lock. Not the kind you install on an apartment door, but the kind you see in hotels. That's when I stopped thinking mistake. I asked the front desk if anyone had been seen dropping them off. They checked cameras. The mailroom camera only showed the package already sitting there. No clear delivery person. No timestamp. So I set up my own trap. I placed a tiny camera in my peephole and aimed another toward the hallway. I told myself I was being paranoid, but my body didn't believe me. 2 nights later, at 2:12 a.m., my hallway camera triggered. A man stood outside my door, not knocking, not trying the handle. He was holding a box. He looked left and right, then set it down carefully, and walked away. I watched the footage in shock. The next morning, I opened the box. Inside was a printed photo, a photo of me, taken from the hallway, facing my door. I was carrying groceries, keys in my hand, head turned slightly like I'd heard something behind me. I hadn't noticed anyone taking a picture. On the back of the photo, one sentence was written in black ink. "You're home mostly on Tuesdays." I felt sick because it was true. I reported everything. The police took the photo, the box, the footage. They asked if I had enemies, if I had an ex, if I'd been followed. I didn't. I had neighbors. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. When I came back the next day, the package was gone. The mailroom was empty. 2 days later, I saw him again, this time in the elevator. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He just stood there holding his phone, facing forward. But as the doors opened on my floor, he quietly said, without turning his head, "Did you like the flashlight?" I didn't answer. I didn't even breathe. I walked out, went straight to my apartment, and locked every lock I had. I moved out within a month, and I still don't use shared mail rooms, because sometimes the scariest part isn't the gift. It's the fact that someone knows exactly how to get it to you.